And now, as we sit here together, we can enjoy two wonderful speakers. It's time for our prepared speakers. And today we have our somebody who is going to give her number 7 speech, Research Your Topic, please. And the title is Afghanistan's Drug War. Please help me welcome Moyara Ruehsen.
United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime issued a report, a 152-page report, updating us on the Afghan opium situation. This was a follow-up to a report that came out 2 or 3 months earlier. And when this report was issued in October, I thought, I have to respond. I need to express my thoughts on this topic, which I've been doing with my students for the past 15 years. And I thought that I had something worthy to say, so I've submitted it to the LA Times, and they published it as an op-ed piece, which I have handed out to you, and which I will ask you not to read. It's simply for you to have if you are interested in reading more on the topic. Today, I thought that I would take advantage of all the research that I did for that op-ed piece, follow up with some additional research just to get my facts accurate, and explain to you what I have concluded based on all the information that I have. The reason we're concerned about the Afghan opium problem is because opium gum is used to make heroin. And the Taliban is taxing opium cultivation as well as making money off of the trafficking of opiates, primarily heroin, outside of Afghanistan. They aren't making that much money, but it is one of the primary concerns that we have. So we have until now been pursuing a policy of crop eradication. This summer, we recently changed that policy to focus on crop replacement schemes. So rather than destroying the crops, we will encourage and subsidize the farmers to grow alternative crops. What I would like to argue is that the policies that we have been pursuing are not conforming to the requirements of the situation, and so we could call them congruous. Not congruous, incongruous. What has happened are 3 things. 1, displacement of the crops. 2, an increase in the cultivation of opium, so the opposite of what our policy aim was. And 3, we're not hurting the Taliban's source of income because they're now getting more of their income from other sources, which I will talk about. In terms of displacement, I have here a map of the primary opium cultivation areas back in 2005. 2 years later, it looked like this, where the bulk of cultivation moved southward. And then by 2008, most of the cultivation was taking place in Helmand province, but we saw the biggest increase in Nimruz. And the dark areas are places where we're seeing significant increases in cultivation. So we have managed to eliminate a lot of the cultivation in this area around Kabul and in northern Afghanistan, but it's just migrating southward. And we're also beginning to see an increase in cultivation once again in the Golden Triangle countries of Laos and Burma. We call this phenomenon the balloon effect. If you squeeze a balloon in one place, it inflates in another area. And that's what is happening. It's simply crop displacement. The other problem with crop eradication efforts is that it creates perverse incentives for farmers to grow more. Given that it's likely to increase prices, or they think, well, if they're eradicating in that area, I think there might be an opportunity here to make some more money, so I'm going to grow more. And we have seen production increase significantly over time, particularly in the last 7 years since we invaded. Now, this diagram here shows you total opium production in the world. It includes the Golden Triangle in the dark part right here, and the blue area is Afghanistan. This red line is an approximate line of the amount of opium consumed worldwide. There wasn't enough opium to meet world demand back in the 1980s, and so the heroin sold on the streets of our urban areas around the world was heavily diluted. As production of opium increased, heroin became more pure, and now users could smoke it instead of injecting it. So, but use stayed relatively stable during this time, but you can see that production started exceeding, or supply started exceeding demand. And so Afghan farmers in particular started stockpiling a lot of their opium supplies. It was estimated by 2000 they had stockpiled enough opium to supply the world's heroin addicts for 3 years. That is why the Taliban banned opium cultivation in 2001. You can see almost no opium was cultivated. And they had very strict policies against this. And it had nothing to do with religion. It had to do with the fact that they wanted to unload their excess supplies. And it definitely pushed up prices. You can see what happened to opium prices. Now that production has skyrocketed again, opium prices are falling, and some farmers in some areas of Afghanistan are finding it's not worth it anymore to produce opium. They are voluntarily leaving opium production. In fact, in some provinces, non-opium farmers are earning more than opium farmers. It depends on what they're growing. But what has happened with this excess production? Again, we created the perverse incentives to encourage that excess production with the policies that we were pursuing. Traffickers are now distributing that excess heroin to new users at a low profit margin throughout Western and Southern Africa and the former Soviet Union, China, and probably India. And that nevertheless still leaves some excess production. Again, they're stockpiling it, and I suspect that if we just simply leave them alone, they'll stop. What are the policy implications of this? Policy implications are we should leave the farmers alone. The Taliban make more money from donations from wealthy Gulf donors than from any other source, primarily from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, a few wealthy donors in Pakistan. So we're not hurting the Taliban, we're hurting the farmers. And we're certainly not winning their hearts and minds. We should instead focus on going after the traffickers at the border regions. Thank you very much.